Every ship we sighted, we sent to the bottom. That's what Admiral Halsey told us before we steamed into the South China Sea in January 1945. And by God, we made him right. I was there, 22 years old, and serving as a fire controlman on the battleship USS New Jersey, flagship of Task Force 38, when we turned Japan's supply line into a mass grave. Waters that once carried the lifeblood of their war effort were soon choked with mangled hulls and oil slicks reaching to the horizon. In 10 days, we would sink more than 300,000 tons of enemy shipping and wipe out over 600 Japanese aircraft. But that morning, cutting through the pre-dawn toward the coast of French Indochina, all I could think about was the force we were about to unleash. The Pacific lay ahead, like black glass beneath the January stars, broken only by the bright wake of our massive armada. I stood at my post in the New Jersey's fire control tower, watching the dark outlines of our ships slide by in flawless formation: 16 carriers, 8 battleships, 15 cruisers, and 58 destroyers, the most formidable naval armada ever gathered. Task Force 38 had become America's spear in the Pacific, and Admiral Halsey wielded it with cold, exacting skill. "Thompson, you see anything on that radar?" Chief Petty Officer Martinez called across the cramped space. The green sweep traced ghostly blips on the screen, mostly friendly, but we all knew the enemy waited beyond our perimeter. "Nothing hostile yet, Chief," I answered, tweaking the range. Still, I could feel it. We were sailing straight into waters Japan controlled, farther inland than any Allied force had dared since the war began. The South China Sea was their artery, linking Southeast Asia's resource-rich regions to the home islands. Tonight we intended to sever it. Admiral Halsey's voice crackled over the ships comes from the flag bridge. "Men of Task Force 38, we are about to strike where the enemy least expects. For 3 years Japanese convoys have passed through these seas unchallenged, hauling the oil, rubber, and raw materials that keep their war machine running. That ends today. Every hostile vessel we meet will go to the bottom. Every airstrip we locate will be smashed. We'll show the Japanese Empire what happens when it faces the United States Navy." The crew around me straightened at those orders. We'd been fighting for more than 3 years, island after bloody island. And finally, we had the power to press the battle to the enemy's doorstep. The days of desperate defense were over. We were the hunters and the Japanese our quarry. As dawn eased over the horizon on January 12, 1945, our first objective emerged through the morning haze: the coast of French Indochina, the ports around Saigon and Cap Saint-Jacques. Intelligence said the harbors were crowded with Japanese shipping, from huge tankers to smaller cargo vessels, every one vital to their war effort. "Flight quarters, flight quarters." The call rolled across the carrier decks in our formation. I raised my binoculars as the first wave of strike planes launched from the USS Essex, engines screaming as they climbed. Hellcats, Helldivers, and Avengers took shape against the pale sky, their wings laden with bombs and torpedoes. The airstrike coordinator came over our radio: "All strike aircraft. This is Able Base. Primary targets are merchant and naval vessels in Saigon Harbor. Secondary targets are port works and fuel depots. Rules of engagement: anything bearing the rising sun flag is a legitimate target." From my perch in the fire control tower, I watched the devastation unfold. At 0800 hours, the first bombs fell, sending thick black smoke rising from docks and installations. Through the rangefinder, I saw Japanese ships scrambling in the cramped waters of the harbor with nowhere to go. Our pilots attacked with the ruthless accuracy that had made American carrier aviation feared. A giant Japanese tanker, likely hauling crude from the Dutch East Indies, took 3 torpedo hits amidships and erupted in a fiery inferno. Visible from miles out, a column of flame that climbed into the sky. The shockwave hit us minutes later, a deep roll that seemed to shudder through the ocean itself. "Direct hit on target designated Big Boy," came the excited voice of Lieutenant Commander Morrison, leading the torpedo squadron. "That one's sinking quick." Moving to secondary targets. Within 2 hours, Saigon Harbor looked like a vision from hell. Burning, listing, and exploding ships. Storage tanks, belching smoke that could be seen for miles. The Japanese had been utterly surprised. The few interceptors they could throw up were swamped by our superior numbers and training. But that was only the opening move. As our strike planes swung back to the carriers, Admiral Halsey was already plotting the next stage. We had drawn first blood. Yet the real haul lay ahead along the busy sea lanes between Singapore and Japan, where dozens of enemy ships moved in tightly escorted convoys. By the afternoon of January 12th, the character of Task Force 38 changed from a conventional fleet into something like a hunting pack. Our destroyers and cruisers fanned out across the South China Sea, while continuous fighter sweeps launched from the carriers, combing the water like predators on the scent. I remember the instant everything snapped into focus. Ensign Bradley, fresh from radar school and jittery as a kitten, sat bolt upright at his scope. Contact bearing 270, range 15 miles. Multiple targets, looks like a convoy. Chief Martinez was at his side in a heartbeat. "How many ships, son?" "I'm counting about 20. Big signatures." The word ran through the ship like lightning. This was not a minor coastal run. This was one of the main supply arteries keeping the Japanese war effort alive. Admiral Halsey's staff quickly plotted an interception, and within minutes, our whole force swung toward the contact. Through the long-range glass, the convoy was unmistakable. A dozen cargo ships and tankers in the center, ringed by 8 destroyers and cruisers forming a protective screen. They were making a fair clip, perhaps 20 knots, but for all intents, they were sitting ducks. Task Force 38 could push 30 knots when it mattered, and it mattered now. Surface action stations. Surface action stations. This is not a drill. The call sent men sprinting to their battle posts throughout the fleet. I checked the fire control gear one last time. Everything tuned and ready. The New Jersey's 16-inch guns, and those of her sister battleships, would have chewed up any hostile warship that dared close. But Admiral Halsey chose a different tack. Rather than close to gun range, he emptied the decks of our carriers. Wave after wave of bombers and fighters descended on the Japanese convoy from several directions to swamp its defenses. The escorting destroyers fought hard, turning their flak into a pall over the convoy, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Our Hellcats struck first, raking gun positions and superstructures with cannon fire. Dive bombers followed, diving steeply to place their 1,000-pounders with brutal precision. Through my binoculars I watched the destroyer Shimakaze. I learned her name later from intelligence. Take a direct hit from a Helldiver's bomb. The blast sheared her in two, and both halves sank within minutes, taking most of the crew with them. The decisive blows, though, came from the torpedo planes. Avengers slid in low over the swells to dodge the less frequent but still dangerous flak, and their Mark 13 torpedoes hit the merchantmen like one by one. The cargo ships and tankers shuddered, lost way, and began to list as seawater poured through yawning ruptures. That's another one for the fish. One pilot called over the radio, Navy slang for a torpedo kill. Big tanker, maybe 10,000 tons. Going down by the bow, the fight lasted under 3 hours, and when it ended, 18 of the 20 enemy vessels were on the bottom of the South China Sea. The 2 that managed to limp away were crippled, trailing oil and listing so badly they likely didn't make Singapore. That night, steaming through fields of wreckage and sheen, Admiral Halsey addressed the task force again. Gentlemen, today we sank more enemy tonnage than some fleets manage in 6 months. But this is only the beginning. Intelligence shows at least 30 more convoys operating here. We will find every one. The next morning produced fresh targets. A Japanese submarine surfaced near our formation, probably attempting to radio a warning, but she didn't get the chance. USS O'Brien spotted her conning tower and opened up with 5-inch fire. The sub-dove, but our destroyers had been hunting submarines for years. They laid down pattern after pattern of depth charges until oil and wreckage rose to the surface. Scratch one enemy submarine. Commander Williams on the Orban reported, she won't be sending messages to Tokyo. By January 15th, we had pushed northward toward the heavily fortified island of Formosa, now called Taiwan, where the Japanese had transformed the island into a major naval and air hub with multiple airfields and stoutly defended harbors. There we expected the first stiff resistance. Formosa loomed like a green bastion, its peaks often shrouded in cloud and its shoreline bristling with enemy batteries. Asterisk, for 3 years, that island had worked like an unsinkable carrier for the enemy, launching strikes against Allied shipping and supporting Japanese operations across the Western Pacific. Task Force 38 had come to put an end to that. As we closed on Formosa, Admiral Halsey summoned his staff into the New Jersey's flag plotting room. I was there with the fire control team, relaying aiming data between ship and plane. The mood was tight but sure. We had already shown we could smash Japanese shipping. But battering a heavily fortified base was another order of difficulty entirely. Intelligence estimates over 200 aircraft on Formosa. Captain Reynolds, the task force intelligence officer, briefed the room. At least 6 major airfields, all ringed with heavy anti-aircraft batteries. And the naval yards at Kang and Kaohsiung are guarded by shore guns, up to 8 inches. Admiral Halsey scanned the reconnaissance photos spread across the table. How many ships in those harbors? He asked. At least 40, sir, came the reply. Mostly smaller craft destroyers, subs, patrol boats, but also several larger units, including what appears to be a heavy cruiser and 2 light cruisers. He nodded, face set. Those ships are the last mobile striking force the Japanese have in this sector. We're going to sink every one of them. The assault began before dawn on January 15th with the largest air operation. Task Force 38 had yet launched. Over 400 aircraft roared into the dark, their engines making a thunder that could be heard for miles. I watched them assemble in the gloom, navigation lights blinking like deadly beacons as they formed into attack groups. The first objective was the airfield at Tainan, where enemy fighters were already being prepared for takeoff. Our pilots, schooled by 3 years of combat, came in fast and low, hitting the grounded planes before they could climb. Tally-ho, bandits on the deck, Commander Peterson called, leading a squadron of Hellcats. They're trying to get airborne, don't let them. Explosions erupted across Formosa as dive bombers found their marks. Aircraft caught while refueling or warming up vanished in flame. The handful of enemy fighters that did manage to launch were quickly overwhelmed by our numbers. Still, the Japanese resisted fiercely. As a second wave closed the island, concealed mountain batteries opened up, and the sky filled with black puffs of flak. Then came the dreaded call. Mayday. Blue leader is hit and going down. Lieutenant Jimmy Walsh, a kid from Ohio on his first combat sortie, had taken a direct hit. His Helldiver trailed smoke and sank in altitude. But instead of bailing, he drove the crippled plane into a final run on a Japanese ammunition depot. "I'm going in," Walsh transmitted. "Tell my folks back home I did my duty." The explosion, when his bomb-laden aircraft struck, lit the skyline and was visible from our ships 20 miles out. It flattened 3 city blocks and set off secondary detonations that burned for hours. Walsh paid with his life, but he struck a blow that would cripple Japanese operations on Formosa for months. By midday, our aircraft controlled the skies, and with enemy fighter cover shattered, we turned to the shipping in the harbors. The heavy cruiser Myoko, pride of the Japanese 8th Fleet, never stood a chance. 3 torpedo hits from our Avengers sent her under within minutes, taking most of her crew. The 2 light cruisers fared no better. Oyode was caught trying to run from Keelung Harbor, and was blasted by dive bombers before she could clear the breakwater, while Sokoa made it into open water, only to be hunted down by our fighters and pounded until she rolled over and sank. That's the end of organized Japanese naval resistance in this area. Captain Morrison, our air operations officer, observed. With the warships gone, Admiral Halsey ordered the destruction to spread. Through the afternoon, our planes methodically smashed every piece of infrastructure that made Formosa useful as a naval base. Dock, fuel tanks, repair sheds, ammunition stores, leaving nothing serviceable. The Japanese made one last desperate attempt at dusk. A small number of remaining aircraft, likely flown by kamikaze pilots, tried to punch through our fighter screen and reach the carriers. They never came close. Radar-directed fighters intercepted them some 30 miles from the task force and shot them all down. Splashed the last bandit, Lieutenant Commander Davis reported. That's the end of the Japanese Air Force on Formosa. When night fell, Formosa was an inferno. The flames could be seen 100 miles away, and the columns of smoke climbed so high they were visible the following morning. In a single day, Task Force 38 had wiped out the Japanese Navy's last major base between the Philippines and the home islands. By January 16, 1945, we had accomplished something unheard of in naval history: absolute control of an entire sea. The South China Sea, Japan's private supply route for 3.5 years, was now dominated by the United States Navy. Every Japanese ship we met went down. Every hostile plane that challenged us was shot from the sky. The rising sun ensign vanished from those waters, and the stars and stripes flew from our masts. Our next objective pushed us toward Hong Kong and the mouth of the Pearl River, where intelligence showed a heavy concentration of Japanese shipping supposedly sheltered in Canton. Admiral Halsey meant to root out every last vessel, no matter how well concealed. I stood on the New Jersey's bridge wing as we neared the Chinese coast. The morning was clear, and the hills around Hong Kong rose from the sea, like old sentinels. Though these sentinels had been conquered, Britain's colony had fallen in 1941 and now served as another link in Japan's logistics chain. "Look at that," Chief Martinez said, pointing through his binoculars toward the harbor. "It's crawling with ships." He was right. I counted at least 20 merchantmen at anchor, and several destroyers and submarines among them. The Japanese had assumed Hong Kong's coastal batteries and nearby airfields would protect those ships. They were mistaken. The assault on Hong Kong began at 09:00 with a massive fighter sweep that cleared the skies of enemy aircraft. Any Japanese planes that tried to intercept were quickly torn down by our veteran pilots. Within an hour, we had air supremacy over the Pearl River Delta. All enemy fighters have been neutralized. Major Stevens, leading our Marine Corsairs, reported, with the air threat suppressed, our dive bombers and torpedo planes moved in, and the cramped waters of the harbor worked against the defenders. The destroyer, UCAS, a battle-seasoned veteran, tried to force her way out. Her AA gun spat rounds at our attackers, and for a moment, it seemed she might break free. Lieutenant Commander Harrison, leading a flight of Avengers, drove his attack through the heavy flak and put 2 torpedoes into her amid. The keel failed, and she went under in less than 5 minutes. Merchant vessels fared even worse. Lacking the speed and maneuverability of warships, they were helpless as our bombers lined up. One after another, they took direct hits from bombs and torpedoes until the harbor ran black with oil and wreckage. "We're massacring them," whispered Seaman Collins, a youngster from Iowa seeing his first major naval action. He was right, but it was war, and those ships were the veins carrying the supplies that sustained Japanese forces across the Pacific. Every hull we sank meant fewer rounds fired at our men, fewer bombs on our bases. Fewer months the war would grind on. By day's end, Hong Kong harbor had been transformed into a graveyard. Masts and funnels jutted from the water where proud ships had lain. Oil fires burned on the surface, and thick black smoke churned into the sky. And the garrison ashore could only watch their lifeline to Tokyo be seen. But we were not done. Intelligence picked up one more large convoy, trying to race from Canton downriver toward the open sea, and Admiral Halsey ordered an immediate pursuit. At sunset, our fastest destroyers led the chase while carrier-based, aircraft equipped for night operations were launched to support them. The convoy was 8 large cargo ships escorted by 4 destroyers, loaded with crucial supplies bound for Japan. Commander Mitchell, in command of the destroyer, USS Nicholas, made first contact as the enemy emerged from the Pearl River. Task Force 38. This is Nicholas. Visual contact with enemy convoy. They're at flank speed, but we're closing. The running battle that followed ran through the night. Our destroyers used superior speed and radar to stay just outside the escort's gun range, while directing airstrikes from the carriers. And one by one, the enemy vessels were hunted down and sunk. The last escort, the destroyer, Hamikos, fought bravely. Her captain turned toward our forces in a desperate bid to buy the merchants time to scatter. It was a gallant but futile gesture. The concentrated fire of 3 American destroyers overwhelmed her within minutes. Hamikos is going down, Commander Mitchell reported. She's firing star shells as she sinks, probably signaling the merchantman to scatter. It didn't help. Our night-flying aircraft picked off the scattered cargo ships one after another. By dawn, on January 17th, all 8 cargo ships and their escorts lay on the bottom of the South China Sea. Convoy that had hoped to deliver critical supplies to Japan had become yet another addition to Task Force 38's mounting tally of enemy losses. By January 21, 1945, Operation Gratitude was drawing to a close. But the devastation we had unleashed was unlike anything the Japanese Navy had endured since the war began. Over 10 days of operations, Task Force 38 had sent more than 100 enemy vessels to the bottom, totaling upwards of 300,000 tons of shipping. We had wiped out over 600 Japanese aircraft, smashed 2 major naval bases, and cut the Empire's most vital supply routes. I stood on the deck of the New Jersey as we steamed out of the South China Sea, watching the sun slide away over waters that, for the moment, belonged to the United States. The surface looked calm, almost serene, yet below lay the broken remains of Japan's sea power. Oil slicks marked the graves of ships, and wreckage planks, torn canvas, and small personal belongings from sailors who would never return bumped against our hull. The human toll was stark. Conservative counts put Japanese military dead at more than 10,000, many lost with their ships in the cold South China Sea. Our losses were comparatively light. Fewer than 50 aircraft lost and roughly 200 American aircrew killed or missing. The victory was lopsided, but those numbers represented fathers, sons, and husbands whose families would be shattered. Thompson, what do you make of this? Chief Martinez asked as we watched the sunset together. I thought for a long moment before answering. I think we've broken their back. Chief, they can't wage this war without supplies from Southeast Asia, and we've cut those lifelines for good. They may not give up tomorrow, but they can't win now. It's only a matter of time. Looking back, that judgment held true. The raid on the South China Sea did more than sink ships. It choked the Japanese Empire's capacity to continue the war. Without oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, and raw materials from French Indochina, Japan's war machine would steadily fail. Admiral Halsey spoke to the task force one last time as we headed for the Philippines. He told us we had written a new chapter in naval history, achieving in 10 days what many thought impossible, driving the Japanese Navy from the South China Sea and severing its crucial supply lines. The vessels we had sunk would never haul supplies again. The aircraft we destroyed would never bomb Allied positions. The bases we wrecked would no longer threaten our operations. You have struck a blow for freedom, he said. That would be remembered. Even proud as I was, I could not banish images of those ships going down and men trapped below as icy water rushed in. War is terrible, even when the cause is just and victory seems certain. Every gain is measured in human lives. The Japanese had begun the conflict with a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,000 Americans, and had pursued conquest across the Pacific with brutality. They had shown little mercy and fought with such fanaticism that negotiated peace was impossible. Yet as I watched the last scars of battle recede, I found my thoughts on the mothers who would not see their sons again and the wives who would wait in vain. Victory does not erase grief. Still, our response had been necessary. Japan's military government had created this confrontation through aggression. American forces had met it with overwhelming, precise power. We demonstrated that the U.S. Navy could project force anywhere on the globe, that no enemy position was immune and no supply line guaranteed safe. By operating freely where the Japanese once controlled the waters, Task Force 38 showed that the Pacific had become, for all practical purposes, American. Enemy commanders throughout the region now had to assume that no place was secure, that at any hour the horizon might fill with American ships and the sky with our planes. As our lights vanished into the night, I reflected on how far we'd come since the dark days of 1942, when when Japanese forces seemed unstoppable and we fought simply to survive at places like Guadalcanal and Midway. Back then, we were holding on. By early 1945, we set the terms of battle, choosing when and where to strike, confident in our ability to destroy any enemy force we met. The South China Sea operation was more than a military triumph. It showcased American industrial and organizational power. Our ships were built in U.S. yards, our aircraft rolled off American lines, and the fuel, ammunition, and provisions that sustained us were products of a nation mobilized for total war. Most of all, the victory belonged to the sailors, soldiers, Marines, and airmen who volunteered, left homes and careers, learned the deadly crafts of combat, and applied them with skill and dedication no enemy could match. As Task Force 38 faded into the vast Pacific, the South China Sea settled into an uneasy quiet. Survivors clung to flotsam and rafts, waiting for rescue that might never arrive. Oil fires burned out on the water. The tide began its endless work of erasing the traces of battle. But the strategic reality had changed. Japan's lifeline to Southeast Asia was severed and would not be restored. In the months that followed, their war economy would weaken as stocks dwindled and new supplies failed to appear. The path to Tokyo Bay and final victory was paved with the wreckage we left behind. Every ship we sighted, we sank. Admiral Halsey's words had been made real, and by doing so we hastened the end of the most destructive war in human history. The cost was high, but the cause was just, and victory